Floor is yours.
Great, thanks so much. So is everybody hungry? You're almost there, you're almost there. We're almost ready for our lunch break. So before we jump in to chat about one of the trends in market research and one of the newest methodologies, I wanted to pay homage, if you will, to one of the most traditional methodologies that dates back far beyond any of us, and by all arguments could be considered the most rigorous of all, otherwise known as show of hands. So I would like to know in this room, how many of you have actually worked with any type of passive metering data to date? Okay, so we've got a couple of you, but not a huge amount. So I have been in research now coming up on just about 20 years, and I have been working with passive metering for the past 4. 4 years ago, passive metering was pretty much restricted to PCs, and now we've evolved into passive metering as it relates to different types of devices such as our mobile and our tablets, and then also measuring cross-device consumption. So as somebody who's been chatting about this stuff for some years, what do you think one of the first questions, responses, accusations I get when we start talking about this is? Anyone? Well, let me tell you. Every breath you take, every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching. They're watching you. They see your every move. Private eyes. They're watching you. So undoubtedly, when we bring up this topic, the question of privacy comes up, and the questions of why would respondents participate in this type of research comes up. So what we did is we put together a research study specifically with the goal of trying to understand what respondents and what consumers know about this research, what their willingness is to participate in this type of research, and really kind of how they feel about it overall. And you might be surprised by some of the findings that we found. Before we get too far, since there was only a couple of people in this room that have worked with this kind of data, I wanted to kind of frame when we talk about passive metering what that means. You may have heard behavioral data, passive data, digital footprints, all of these types of things, but essentially it's an application that sits on an individual's device. It may be their PC, their tablet, their mobile, and it runs in the background, and it tracks all the activities and things that are going on that device. In this particular case, we focused specifically on mobile. The application was in the background, and it tracked all of the mobile activities that the consumer was doing, including all of their web surfing. Okay? So as we start to get into taking a look at how people feel about it, we really wanted to understand a couple of things, right? So our goal was to understand what is it that people know about this, if anything. What is their willingness? We really want to measure how do people feel? Are they willing to actually participate? And then we wanted to take a look and understand what, if any, differences there may be between consumer groups and segments, but also as a result of different types of sample. So when we recruit people from different places, do they respond, react, or have different opinions about this type of stuff? The study was a 3-part study. The first thing was to recruit these individuals. We wanted to ask them a couple of questions in advance, invite them to participate. The second part of the study involved downloading this metering application specifically to their mobile phone. Once they had that downloaded, they were asked to leave it running for a period of 3 to 4 weeks, depending on at what part of the cycle they were recruited in. Finally, we did a follow-up survey, and in that follow-up survey, we asked them, how their experience was, and then there was a group of people who were voluntarily asked if they were interested to also upload a video for us and just share in general their experience with us as it related to participating in the research. So really quickly, because I realize that a lot of people aren't specifically in tune with the technology, when someone downloads one of these metering applications, it looks just like an application that you would have on any of your things that you download, any of your games that you play or other things. When you click on that in the background, it does show that it's working, but it is fairly invisible and it doesn't interrupt their phone at all. Okay? So let's take a look at the sample sources we recruited from. So the first idea was to recruit some general population people from 2 different main sources. So the first source was a double opted-in panel. Those individuals who had signed up to participate in research and then received an email and agreed. And the second source, which I know there's a lot of different definitions out there, was a river sample source. So for purposes of kind of our conversation today, we will consider river sample those people who are not double opted in to a panel, or at least didn't come to us from an invitation that was sent. So people that are out there on the river that are intercepted live may or may not be members of panel, but that's not how they were invited to participate in the study. We intentionally recruited these groups so that they were both equal coming into the study. We recruited them both click to population so that we knew that we started with the same type of segment as it related. We also did one separate group, which was a mobile. These people were all recruited via mobile, and they were also given a little bit of different information as to what they would do. When we take a look at these perceptions of passive metering, we asked them before they participated and after they participated. You might be surprised that we asked an open-ended question of people and said, have you ever heard of this? And what do you think it is? You may notice that these things don't all add up, and that's because there was a lot of don't knows, and there was a lot of gibberish in there, and, but this is what we came up with. And there was a small percentage in there that did know about it, that related to spying, but most of them had a pretty good definition. Some of them even had better definitions than us as researchers have. So we found that to be really interesting. When we got to the post-survey, at the beginning, they didn't have concerns about their battery drain. At the end, they started to show that they were really concerned about this, even though we've tested it multiple times to show that that's not the case. Okay, let's hear what they have to say.
An app. It was real simple. It was really easy to download. It only took 2-3 seconds to download, 10 seconds to install. Real simple, really easy.
My experience was positive. And the reason I say that is because I like how it was extremely easy to download and install this app on my phone.
I really didn't even realize this was on here after I loaded it on. As far as like thinking about it. So it was very passive, didn't interfere, I don't think, at all with anything.
The application itself was very easy to install. All I had to do was go on my Play Store, download the app and install it, and just let it run in the background.
I didn't really notice that it was on my phone. I noticed it was on my phone, but I forgot about it after probably about the second week that I downloaded it.
But I did know it was running, and it was interesting. It didn't really change my habits, to tell you the truth, because even though I knew it was running, most of the time I didn't think about it.
Great. So Leslie's going to walk us through some of those differentiators we found in terms of sample in some of the segments.
Right. So moving on from the more qualitative aspects of the study to the quantitative, this next slide and the subsequent slides that you'll see are really comparing recruitment and what it took to get people via these various modes to accept the passive metering application. And on this first slide, what we're doing is starting at the beginning where we're recruiting them, and for a 100 completed people, taking them through the screener, for my soapbox panel, the double opt-in sample, we need 714 people versus 3,704 on River. And we attribute this primarily to the fact that the double opt-in panelists are exposed to the brand soapbox, understand the invitation, have experience with that brand, and are more trusting of it. But the story continues on because having gone through a screener, we also want them to be willing to accept the download, and we find that the double opt-in panel outperforms River at this stage as well, with 67% versus 59% agreeing to download. Now, agreeing to download doesn't mean they will download, so that's the next step, is the follow-through. And this is where the double opt-in panel really outperforms River Sample by almost a 2-to-1 factor. And then finally, there's a stage for 3 to 4 weeks where the respondent is simply walking around being metered and not really having to participate and do anything. And then we invite them back, and they complete a very, very brief follow-up survey about the experience. And once again, and through every stage along the way, the double opt-in panel has outperformed on this task as well. But there's a little more to the story because, as Jacqueline mentioned, we also recruited this third segment, which were people who were pre-informed that they needed, they had been pre-screened on smartphones. They were a part of the double opt-in soapbox mobile segment. And as they started the survey, we detected and we knew that they had the proper type of device to accept the download. Those people by far outperformed the other two segments in accepting and downloading. Part of the reason here is that there was actual integration to the app itself, so they could actually start taking the initial recruitment survey and go all the way through the download in a single session, whereas that was not necessarily the case for the double opt-in panel or River. So there's another way of looking at it as well, which is that the people who came in via panel and River could choose whatever device they wanted. So what this particular slide is cutting for you is how many people overall across all segments came in on mobile versus the web and what their acceptance of download was. And regardless, if they came in on mobile, of course, they're much more willing to accept the download of the passive metering app. Again, a lot of this we feel has to do with trust because especially with the River sample, these people had to be exposed to 2 brands, whereas the Soapbox panel only had 1 brand. And those people holding the smartphone, it's just right there at the ready. They're doing it all in a single session. But of course, you don't always choose your recruitment mode based upon what is the most efficient. And so what we wanted to do is take a look at the demographics underlying each of these recruitment modes and see if there was any inherent biases in introducing one mode versus the other. And on this first slide, we're really just looking at age and gender. And we don't really see much in the way of significant differences based upon the recruitment mode. We delved into some additional demographics, which are things like household makeup, ethnicity, income. Again, very few statistical differences based upon recruitment mode. But then we get to behavior. And when we get to behavioral data, we do start to see some significant differences. This first slide is looking at on-device activity, and we see that the smartphone users really engage in a variety of smartphone any type of on-device behavior at a much greater level than the other segments. We also see that River tends to use their smartphone more for business purposes than the other segments, and these also make inherent, they just feel right to us based upon what we know. And we looked at another type of behavior, which is near and dear to those of us in this room, and that's participation in other types of research projects, because a lot of time we introduce River simply because we do want people who don't necessarily participate in a lot of panels or a lot of research projects. And what we see here is what we might expect, that those people who are part of the double opt-in sample tend to belong to more panels, participate in more studies of all types than River. But those people who participate in smartphones were more accustomed to taking and more likely to have taken a survey on a smartphone or engaged in some type of what we might call more innovative research. So we do see behavioral differences while not demographics. And at this point, we'd like to kind of close with some best practices and some takeaways.
So we're just about ready to wrap up for some questions. This is a topic, since it's new and exploratory, we could talk about for a long time. But our goal here today was really just to help you understand what respondents are thinking about this, where we're going, and some of the different ways we can recruit. So if we can leave you with a couple of things as it relates to best practices. What we find in our experience is that our job as researchers is to make things easy for respondents, right? So that means if we can integrate, if we can be clear with them about what their expectations are, if we can make informed consent easy, their privacy, access to questions, these are all things that are going to increase compliance. Our job as researchers is also around education, so how do we relay the information to them about what it is we expect from them, what it is that they're doing to help us out here. As part of best practices, we also learned that sample blend can get you some diversity within the group that you're actually monitoring, even though some things may be more difficult to get than others. While at the same time, if you are restricted to one mode or another, it may not terribly skew your data. And then finally, when we look at some of these best practices, it's really, really important that as researchers, we get very clear about what other activities we're going to ask them to do coupled with this passive metering. I'm happy to chat with anybody about that after, but once you start introducing surveys and follow-ups and all kinds of things, there are some other impacts on the way that this data is collected and how people feel about it.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Well done.